Hello, everybody. My name is Meryl McBride, and I have the pleasure of serving as your host today. I want to welcome you to this edition of the VWEC Expert Series, in which we ask educational professionals to share their experiences and their insights into ways that virtual worlds can be used to engage students. I'm pleased to introduce today's guest presenter, Gentle Heron, or Alice Krueger, who is the founder of VirtuAbility, Inc., a nonprofit corporation chartered in the state of Colorado. Gentle is better known to most of us as the creative genius behind the virtual ability sims in Second Life. She is chair of the board of directors of VirtuAbility, and Gentle is no stranger to the world of education, having taught a variety of subjects from kindergarten to college. In addition, she is a published researcher and is a widely sought-after speaker on how virtual worlds can be used to accommodate people with actual world disabilities. Today, she wishes to talk to us regarding understanding and addressing misinformation about science, based on a publication by the same name distributed by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in late 2024. She observes that several of their recommendations may be controversial in today's climate. Please be advised that this presentation will be recorded and streamed on YouTube and will be fully captioned. Please see the instructions on the sign to my lower right. That includes the URL. Feel free to post questions to chat during her talk, and we will collect them to be answered during our discussion time at the end of the hour. The co-host, Librarian Greg, and I will monitor the chat. Without further delay, I yield the floor to Gentle.
Thank you, Meryl. So I want to welcome everyone to this presentation, friends new and old. I do have an important disclaimer that I need to make up front. Today I am speaking for myself, Alice Kreuger. I am not speaking for VirtuAbility, Inc. As Meryl said, the information I am sharing today is from a report that's published by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, and it is a consensus study report. The formal citation is here. And you can look up that very long original text at that place, or you can request a PDF copy if you want to get it from info@virtualability.org. So I'm going to summarize, not AI summarize. This is an AK, Alice Kreuger summary, of the 409 pages of that report. And I'm going to do that in text and voice. I'm then going to offer you the text of this presentation on a note card when we're all done with our discussion. And I'm going to pause a lot during this presentation to allow for group discussion. We all know that misinformation about every topic possible is pervasive. Misinformation may be inconsequential, or it may have various negative impacts. Entertainment sometimes contains misinformation. Surprise, surprise. But information that shapes people's perceptions, informs policies, and impacts services can have profound and long-lasting effects on individuals, communities, population segments, and society in general. Please keep in mind that much of what I'm going to talk about today is on science, but it can just as readily apply to misinformation in other fields. And it's actually pretty difficult to define misinformation as it applies in science. Science is a process where knowledge claims are tested and either accepted or they may become modified as additional knowledge accumulates. The scientific process is one of continuing revision. And that means science understanding is incremental. in the older, more well-established fields of science like biology and chemistry. Scientists often speak of standing on the shoulders of giants. That's a familiar quote. It means their work builds on the work of previous experts in their field. But science can also make rapid leaps in new areas of study, and we saw that quite frequently during the COVID crisis. The rapid appearance of new knowledge that displaces prior understanding can be confusing to people who are not scientists. They may use this established process of knowledge evolution to question the trustworthiness of science and of scientists. Was the prior state of knowledge misinformation? No. It was the best evidence-based knowledge available at that time. I'm going to attempt to define and distinguish three related terms: misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. This report defines misinformation as, quote, information that asserts or implies claims that are inconsistent with the weight of accepted scientific evidence at the time, unquote. Misinformation becomes disinformation if the disseminator knows it is false. Disinformation may be deliberately created to harm, manipulate, or mislead. Now, not all misinformation is disinformation. Often the person sharing false information is not aware it is false. Malinformation is based on fact, but it is used out of context. The purpose of malinformation is to harm, manipulate, or mislead. Does that make sense? Okay, Dodge, Val, yes, yes. Okay, good. I'm used to giving references when I present, so I want to warn you that I will offer a number of live links during the presentation. And I'd recommend that you click the links and bookmark them to review them later. So here's your first link. It's a summary about misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. It comes from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and there is the link for you to click and read later. Identification of misinformation about science changes over time as scientific knowledge evolves. This report reminds us that misleading information is not necessarily false. True information can cause inaccurate understanding or false beliefs, and it is not a characteristic of the information itself. Instead, it is a product of the interaction between the information and its recipient. The same fact can be informative to one person and misleading to another, and that definitely is something to ponder. The sources of misinformation about science are diverse. Misinformation can originate in many types of media. Some sources of misinformation, disinformation, and misleading information include corporations, governments and politicians, non-governmental organizations, science organizations and institutions, alternate health and science industries, news media organizations and institutional press offices, entertainment, and individuals, both scientists and non-scientists. And of course, that's not just true for science, but for other fields as well. The report makes three recommendations to eliminate the sources of misinformation. To curb science misinformation, misinformation should be actively countered. Press releases should be confirmed by researchers. Public communicators of science should be well educated. That made me laugh. Specifically, the context of research results, which means the limitations of the research and the weight of the evidence, should be clearly provided. Science, medical, and health professionals who are public communicators should receive training and support from professional communicators. Science communicators should use evidence-based communication strategies, including providing context, interpretations, and caveats of scientific research results. I really like how the authors of this report attempt to offer solutions when they point out specific concerns. You don't always get that. Do you think these solutions also apply outside of the fields of science? And we're talking about those solutions being to eliminate the sources of misinformation. You can replace the word science with your favorite field. Factors supporting the spread of misinformation in science include multiple rapid channels of information flow, reduced journalism funding, motivations and incentives, and crises and societal mistrust. Coverage of science has been reduced lately and is covered by journalists with no expertise in science, and that causes inaccuracies. The volume, production, speed, and spread of information may detach information from its context. Search algorithms constrain the information offered to individuals, and content on social media is not well moderated. Crises increase both interest in and uncertainty in the information consuming public. So here's another reference you can bookmark for later. It's called How Social Media Rewards Misinformation. And that, to me, is a scary thought. Misinformation flows rapidly through numerous communication channels. Misinformation spread is facilitated by online platform features offering incentives, motivations, and strategies for easier spread. Societal factors, including crises and mistrust, and changes in journalism, such as more but less accurate science news. The report makes 6 recommendations to halt the spread of misinformation. Create an independent agency to curate high-quality science information. They recommend that online platforms should promote valid information. Promote sharing between scientists and journalists. Train professional communicators in data literacy and reasoning. I think Val likes that one. Build and maintain preparedness capacity to communicate science. Document the origin, spread, and impact of misinformation. Misinformation may have many impacts. It can hinder informed decision-making. It might exacerbate existing harms, diminish trust in public institutions, and create or possibly reinforce stereotypes. Misinformation can lead to harmful decisions at all levels, from the individual person to governmental rulemaking. It can result in behaviors with negative consequences. If it distorts public opinion and limits productive debate, misinformation can threaten the health of a democratic system. If the misinformation is about specific population groups or communities, this can lead to bias and harmful false narratives, and that all contributes to additional inequalities. The report makes 2 recommendations for dealing with the impacts of misinformation. Community-based organizations should build community resilience against misinformation, and that's one of the things I hope to be doing here. Efforts to combat misinformation must be tailored for specific audiences. That gets back to what Dom said about speak difficult. Science information voids that are specific to particular communities must be identified and targeted by strategies developed to address them. Common misinformation should be pre-bunked, and education about manipulation of information should be made widely available. Don't you just love that term, pre-bunking? I love that. Debunking of misinformation should include explanations of why it is false and of the motivation of those who are spreading it. Interventions to address misinformation may attempt to disrupt the supply, demand, distribution, or uptake of misinformation. Supply-based interventions reduce the amount of circulating misinformation or improve the quality of circulating information. Demand-based interventions act to reduce the consumption of misinformation. Distribution-based interventions limit the spread of misinformation. Uptake-based interventions reduce the effects of misinformation on beliefs or behaviors. Community, state, and national organizations should use effective approaches to addressing misinformation about science. The report makes two recommendations related to interventions to address misinformation. Community organizations should provide high-quality, timely, culturally relevant, and accurately translated science information. Those are all important and very difficult points. All organizations should pre-bunk and debunk common false themes and narratives. False statements should be clarified, and the motivation for spreading false information should be explained. And again, those points are important and difficult. Does this all also apply outside the field of science? What do you think? I'm seeing a lot of agreement here. Thought Bubble says those apply outside of science in advertising. And Dom is agreeing with Trini that people believe what they want to and will be drawn to an appealing narrative, false or otherwise. Now, this new slide image is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. So I'm going to address Bronfenbrenner's theory here. It shows 6 concentric circles from the innermost circle, which is the individual level, through the exosystem, and that includes local governments and mass media, keeping going out to the macrosystem level, which is social norms, political systems, and the external circle is the chronosystem or time. And there is the link for that image if you're interested in it. Many strategies related to dealing with science misinformation address individuals, when actually systems level actions are necessary. Yet there's been little research on misinformation mitigation at higher organizational levels, farther out in the circles. Focusing on individual change puts the burden of mitigation on individuals rather than on larger systems. Is that fair? Is it reasonable? It also makes individual action seem to be the most effective way to address misinformation, which is not necessarily true. System-level strategies have not been adequately evaluated for efficacy, and this is often due to funding priorities. I think we've heard that one before. What do you think? Where does the power lie to change the impact of science misinformation or of misinformation in any field? And as we have a little bit of discussion here, where do you think this power lies? I want to remind everybody I'm just a little bit over halfway through what I wanted to share today. I need to reassure my colleagues here. Where does the power lie to change the impact of misinformation? Sharkin says it starts with individuals who affect their local communities and in turn affects state, national, and global. Ocean says in her travels and experiences online, the power is the money to be made by various companies. Dom says unless logic becomes the dominant language in the world, he can't see how people can ever be able to understand even the most basic principles of science. Ocean says the money. Marley says, unfortunately, those with expertise and training do not have the power to legislate or do what needs doing. Stephen says formal education system can play a big role in combating misinformation, which is both the government society responsibility and personal effort for everyone to make work to combat ignorance. Ignorance, interesting. Trini says Sagan was good at making it sound interesting and entertaining, meaning science, and asks, is education still doing that? So that's a good question. Last thoughts? Okay, Sharkin, you get the last say. And it also boils down to whether we are tending to misinformation or malintended information. Oh, we've got a lot of information. Dom says test video of dancing naked lady, video of cute kitten playing with a ball, video of a professor explaining the 3 laws of motion. Which videos win? Ace says, I think a particularly important problem in the current day is the deliberate spread of false information by an enemy country with the sole purpose of causing social disturbance. Namara says she thinks there's a shared experience and therefore a shared responsibility, but she thinks the bulk of the burden is with the information creator, the health community, scientists, business, etc. Individuals need to be informed enough to stand up to mis and disinformation and correct it as we can, and she believes the cat will win. So going on, the report concludes that research needs to be directed at systems-level strategies to address science misinformation, and it makes one recommendation related to scale and efficacies of mitigation strategies. Most of the research on the effects of strategies to address science information has been done at the individual personal level. And we're talking even education, science education. We need to better understand the impacts of misinformation and the capabilities of strategies to refute it within the community level, platforms, policy, and regulatory systems. Understanding how individual and structural factors interact to spread misinformation and influence its impact could aid in the design of effective and efficient pre-bunking and debunking strategies. Shiloh says, I think there is both a deliberate spread of misinformation, but there's also individual students who have no reasoning ability to determine what is accurate and what is not. Public schools and universities need to teach how to think, how to evaluate, and how to research to find out the accuracy of information. The report states that the impact of misinformation on underserved groups and the effectiveness of mitigation strategies is not well documented. Underserved groups are often excluded from research projects. Inconsistent rules about data privacy across social media platforms hinder research on their impact on the spread of misinformation. In order for research results to support establishment of fair policies, researchers need better access to consistent data. The report makes a single recommendation related to obtaining good quality data about science misinformation on social media platforms. Tagline says, critical thinking is often cited as the key, but we have a society in which critical thinking is not generally in the skill set of the majority. It would take a generation at least, with intensive modification and building up of education, and that against the bias and opposition of an oppositional society. Currently, most seem to think that critical thinking is simply being skeptical, and quite often argument is backed up by emotional threads or resorting to conspiracy theories or religiosity and abdication of all intellectual responsibility to the idea of an omnipotent deity. And Stephen, you might wish to give Tagline an invitation to the 101 group. People are agreeing with you, Tagline. Social media companies and researchers need to collaborate to improve the current situation. Social media companies and researchers have to improve their working relationships. Social media companies should not charge for access to their data. AS says subliminal messaging is a serious danger. Another is the bottlenecking of widely used sources of knowledge, such as AI, that can easily be manipulated by wealthy or powerful organizations. The recommendation also includes that researchers need to stay independent of the companies they are researching. And Marley points out that funding is an issue. Is science misinformation a new phenomenon? What do you think? Is this just in our generation? Dom says emotional manipulation targets low self-esteem, which is probably the worst malady in current society. Are you saying, Dom, that science misinformation is new nowadays? Stephen says snake oil is an old term. I don't know how old that term is. Trini says a lie can go around the world 3 times before the truth has got its boots on. And that is a Terry Pratchett quote, and that's a very good one. Val says it's not new, but more prevalent due to social media and the internet. AS says science disinformation is part of a wider and older tradition of propaganda. Tagline says no, the story of tetraethyl lead being ubiquitous as touted and promulgated by a hired gun scientist is an example of disinformation to protect corporate interests. That's a good one to end this part of the discussion on. Val says propaganda is shared way faster now, but has always been around. So, of course, science misinformation isn't new. It's been around for at least 3 centuries. And I love this cartoon. This is a cartoon from the Anti-Vaccine Society, which was back in 1802. And there were both misinformation and disinformation being spread back then about the smallpox vaccine. Don't you just love that picture? Trini says fighting misinformation is like running on quicksand. Debunk and they can tell another lie as a smokescreen. 18th century. That makes sense. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration was created in 1906 to combat widespread misinformation about the safety and effectiveness of drugs, food additives, and other products. I'm sure they were looking at snake oil. Tagline says propaganda was much easier as when Alexander the Great simply convinced the ignorant and gullible masses that he was a god. So here is the website of the Food and Drug Administration, if you want to see what they're doing today. It's also important to consider who is most likely to believe misinformation about science. And in truth, Anyone has the potential to believe misinformation. Even you, even me. Dom wants to know, how can science ever compete against TikTok videos and the similar? People are most likely to believe science information that aligns with their values and existing worldview. They're most likely to believe if it's from a source they trust, and we don't all trust the same sources. They're most likely to believe something that is often repeated. Val points out that was named confirmation bias. And they're most likely to believe on a topic for which they don't have strong pre-existing beliefs and attitudes. Of course, basic science literacy is important, but that does not prevent a person from believing misinformation. Sociocultural factors influence the science information and misinformation that people are exposed to. We don't all get the same information on any topic. And many other factors influence the actions an individual will take based on whatever information they receive. And Trini says the first thing a cult tells you is that everyone else is lying, and that's from the great Randy. Why do you think science misinformation may be problematic? Is it more problematic in science than misinformation in other fields? AS gives the 1950s example. Misinformation was spread about the biology and spread vectors of the potato woodworm, trying to blame it on deliberate American sabotage and biowarfare instead of real scientific knowledge of this pest's life cycle. Why is science misinformation problematic? And is it more problematic than misinformation in other fields? Tagline says, as the cult member who, what will your opponent say is true? Then you have a clue as long as you know who the cult members are for sure. Dom says, you have to figure out if people really want to learn the truth. Stephen says it's particularly problematic when it comes to medicine. Let's face it, 3 of the greatest inventions for supporting a large population are bleach and other cleansers, antibiotic drugs, and vaccines. Misuse or lack of use of those have big consequences. Shiloh asks a general question, haphazard question, but is there a correlation in our poor mathematics achievement and declining ability to evaluate information? I hope you're not expecting an answer from me for that one. That's a good question. Trini says, yes, the blame something else approach is very prevalent now. Marley says economic drivers are often the villains in this scenario. For example, pharmacologists pushing stuff that produces big profits, whether it's good for people or not. AS says, well, I think most people are more used to seeing misinformation in politics or current news, so they are better at identifying it when they see it. People don't trust politicians. Misinformation is harder to identify with science, especially when scientists with real degrees are coming out with reputable institutions are engaged in it. Tagline says antiseptics and clean drinking water and sewage disposal accounted more for population growth since the mid-19th century than the improved medical science and medical care. Sharkin says as an outlier, she believes it's more problematic because people are not taught social emotional skill sets. That is, feelings and sensations are real, and they're not a frou-frou distinction that things that we can touch. We need to know how to make a distinction as well about the certainty trap. Time for one more comment from someone. Dom is agreeing with Sharkin, but that's about balance, not how someone should actually think. Trini says people don't want knowledge, they want certainty. So going on, the problem is that misunderstanding science causes misunderstanding of the world. Misunderstanding the world misaligns individual, community, and governmental choices and preferences. Misinformation about science can undermine trust in important societal institutions. Misinformation about science is a multifaceted, complex phenomenon, and all of us have important roles in addressing it. In order to develop informed policy responses and help individuals and communities combat the potential negative effects of science misinformation, we need to know a lot more. We have to examine what we assume about the origins of the misinformation, about how and why it spreads, and about how we can help mitigate its negative effects. Val is reminding us that Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge, and that means that science is open to change. We do not yet know enough about the dynamics of science misinformation. We know little about how misinformation is shared within and affects different local communities, especially the underserved, socially vulnerable groups. We don't know enough about misinformation that travels through offline social networks and older media like newspapers and television rather than online. There's a lot of work to be done. I thought you might like some references about researching misinformation, so I'm going to share a few references now. Bubble asks, is misinformation still bad if it has a positive outcome? It's another good question. I can't avoid pointing out how librarians and libraries may be leading us in this endeavor. So first, I'm going to share with you the link from the University of California Press for a practical guide to doing behavioral research on fake news and misinformation. And I really hope some of the professors in the audience today will convince their grad students to do some research in that area. Tagline reminds us that presentation is so important in terms of getting ideas across. One episode of South Park entitled The Sermon on the Mount probably has had far more impact than a good speech by an orator and communicator like Barack Obama. Thank you, Dom. And the next one I want to share is called How to Research Misinformation Online. And that's from an organization called Sage Publications, and they publish scientific research. They're a very well-respected organization. Val says librarians and libraries play a role in archival and information organization and delivery, and are, of course, being impacted by AI. So the next one I want to share is a research paper called What Do We Study When We Study Misinformation? And this was a study that came out of Harvard. They looked at experimental research from 2016 to 2022, and they looked at what was actually being studied. That's a really interesting article. And another one, 8 recommendations for countering misinformation, from the American Psychological Association, again, a reputable organization. And so those 4 links would be a good start toward building your anti-misinformation toolbox. So go forth and combat science misinformation wherever you notice it. If you click on the box that I'm about to put down, if I can turn around and see where I'm looking, you'll get a note card that has a copy of the text for today. I'll put that down right now. I'll put it in front of Meryl, see if she trips on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she and I are friends. We've known each other for years. You may want to save
Yes.
the chat so that you can see all the additional information that our friends who are here today have shared. And I want to thank everyone for your attention and input.
Oh, thank you so much. We want to give gentle, a hearty thank you for her presentation. As I said before, her slides will be available on the slides and information wall behind us and to my right. Now is the time to adjourn to the deck at the back of the venue to address questions captured in chat and to discuss any other questions or comments that people may have. Before we do that, however, please note that the next installment of the VWEC Expert Series will be on August 8th, 1 p.m. SLT, at which time we will discuss VWEC outreach as part of the MOOC. Finally, you can find links to our in-world calendar and related helpful information. And we also have a variety of media where information can be had about VWEC. The media include YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. And please join me in our discussion time at the back of the deck. And my sincere thanks to all of you for spending time on a Friday afternoon in the dog days of summer, coming here and enjoying this wonderful presentation. So have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you for coming.